Well, the deportation of such a famous and successful international sporting name has had its critics as well. Social media has been full of vitriol, isn't that a surprise? With various reactions. There was this on the unanimous decision: a kangaroo court in a banana republic, referring to an earlier reaction by Nigel Farage. The free speech advocates were out in full voice. They were quite hostile, actually, with one tweeting, "So essentially the Australian government kicked Djokovic out of the country because they were afraid he would make people disagree with the government. Isn't this what dictatorships do?" And former Australian tennis star Renee Stubbs wrote, "This is a sad, sad day for tennis, Australia, the Australian Open, and obviously for Djokovic. I honestly cannot believe it's come to this." While in the United States, tennis legend John McEnroe praised Djokovic for taking on Australian authorities.
It's total BS. Listen, if he decides not to have a vaccine and the Australian authorities say to him, "You cannot go down there unless you're vaccinated," end of story, it's black or white. He decides whether or not he wants to do it. He's got very strong beliefs. He's entitled to those beliefs. The guy's won it 9 times. I tell you, it was gutsy in a way. I got to hand it to him in a way, because I had 7 majors. He's got 20. The reason he's got a lot more than me, that he was willing to go risk that.
Joining me now is the author of the only tennis site, Canadian Stephanie Myles, who's in Melbourne at the moment for the Australian Open. Stephanie, thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It's been a great pre-tournament story for you, giving you plenty of content. It's true, isn't it? We are not the only country with a Grand Slam who disallow unvaccinated players.
Well, it's hard to say because it's such a moving target. If Djokovic were to try to get into the US right now, or as he might next month for a couple of big events there, having had COVID is not going to work to get him in the country. I think he would have to go to President Joe Biden and ask for a special hall pass or something.
He might try that.
But, again, yeah, well, he might. But by the time August rolls around, it might be quite different. So the problem with this is that the ATP Tour and the WTA Tour have never required so far their players to be vaccinated to even play all year. So all year, we journalists were vaccinated. Often the fans were vaccinated, but half the players weren't.
Ridiculous.
So it's been a pretty ridiculous. It's been a ridiculous situation, and they are independent contractors. They are not, employees of the tours, and they don't feel like they can mandate it. And as I said, it's made for life difficult for us to try to work, for people who are working at the tournaments to not know, who's been vaccinated or not. It's been complicated.
I bet it has. So if he wants to play in the French Open, Macron is not going to allow him, given the fact that he's not vaccinated, because Macron has come down hard on the unvaccinated.
Exactly right. And I think that he was heard from the tournament that they would welcome him, but it's not quite that simple, right? You can't play the tournament unless you're allowed into the country, which is sort of the issue he had here. He was allowed to play the tournament, but technically he was not allowed to be in the country. So this is just the first chapter of Mr. Djokovic's long saga to be right and to hold on to his beliefs, because it's going to become more and more difficult for him to play. And you could see that because last summer or last fall, maybe half the players were vaccinated, and knowing they were coming down here and had to be vaccinated, it got to about 97% in a big fat hurry.
Yeah. So what's been the overall international reaction, the overwhelming sentiment, given the fact that we have probably very strict unvaccination rules, if you can put it that way, whereas in other parts of the world we've been a little bit more easy about who was and who wasn't?
Well, you're sort of strict on rules generally in this country, and don't necessarily appreciate it when people try to break them. And so that's a sort of an interesting cultural thing that I've noticed about the Aussies, which is actually great because it's gotten you vaccinated to like 93%. I spent a lot of time doing television things or whatever in the US and in Canada where I'm from. And, this whole notion of you being a banana republic or something like that, I don't think that that's it, because certainly the Novak Djokovic fans will follow his father's lead and think he's Jesus on the cross, and he's been, shot with 50 bullets, and, he's been tortured and all of this kind of stuff. But the actual reality is that somebody told him that he had the green light to come down. He didn't book 4 first-class tickets for himself and his team just on a whim or by hoping he could kind of just slide in there unnoticed, because obviously he was not going to be unnoticed. So there's plenty of gray area. There's plenty of confusion and sort of blame to go around. And I suspect that a lot of interesting things will come out over the next few months. And it wouldn't shock me if Djokovic sued the tournament, sued Tennis Australia, because obviously they would be the ones to tell him that he, could come. Again, he shouldn't have taken their word for it. He should have double-checked everything himself, but he didn't.
Tennis Australia and the organisers of the Australian Open have a hell of a lot of questions to answer, don't they?
They certainly do. And so far, they've been conspicuously extremely silent. I guess I can understand that, but I think that it's probably time that they maybe do a little talking and either stand up for themselves or own it a little bit or something. Because otherwise, Djokovic is the guy, he's the one who looks like the only bad guy in this whole situation. And I'm not sure that necessarily helps them.
The players still left in the tournament, the entire entourage there, are probably unlikely to say anything too bad about the Australian Open, given the fact that they're in the tent. But what are they whispering around the corridors and around the dressing rooms about what happened to Novak?
Well, I think it depends on whether they like Djokovic or not. And at this point, coming up publicly in support of him, knowing that they're in Australia and that the fans are paying attention to this, is not necessarily a wise move, because most of them were here last year, as I was, after the hotel quarantine. Anybody who dared to even criticize that the buns weren't soft enough, we're hearing it from everybody about how dare you criticize our hotel quarantine, and you don't have to come, just go home. So they already know what the reaction is going to be. I think overall, and I can't speak for every player, but I think overall they're just tired of all the oxygen being sucked out of the tournament by one guy. And also the players who didn't want to necessarily be vaccinated, but they did it because they knew they had to come down and play here. I was sitting there going, well, wait a second, how come he would, almost get away with not having to do it? But of course, in the end, he didn't get away with it, and he sort of ran off with his tail between his legs. And I hope he's a little bit embarrassed by all that went on. And look, I mean, he went through some pretty tough stuff there. They weren't fooling around.
Stephanie Myles, great insight. Thank you so much for your time, and enjoy your Australian Open.
Thank you. Let's talk tennis now.
It's real tennis. Thank you very much.